Yes, yes. Coffee Conversations with Greg J is on. Just checking around here. All systems are go, I think. Wow, what an exciting program we have for you on today. Uh, we're still continuing in our vein, always all about, casual conversations, but compelling information from a global perspective, Pan-African thought. That's what we do here. Sip coffee, chop it up with my friends all around the globe, and try to find out what we can learn. Knowledge seekers, that's what we are here. Coffee Conversations with Greg J. When we talk about this whole notion of Pan-Africanism and Pan-African thought, right? We always hear, there's a hall of fame of folks out there. There's, Mr. Ben Yakiman, who else? Henry Clarke, John Henri Clarke. There's so many, Francis Cress Welsing, Neely Fuller. There's so many names we can name, right? And Runoko Rashidi is one that rings in our hearts on today. And we're going to explore the legacy of Runoko Rashidi. I met him a few times when I was working at the radio station and followed him. I mean, his travels all the time just fascinated me. And I guess I could honestly say that he is an inspiration in my travels as we keep going back and forth to the continent of Africa and exploring things. You know how we do it. Got trips coming up, so we'll talk to you about that later. But today, Runoko Rashidi has gone on to be with the ancestors. It's not uncommon for people to come and drop through this program as listeners, as viewers who have traveled on those sojourns to Mother Africa, to Australia, to the other places. He said, wherever you go in the world, go find some Black folks, today our guest is the renowned Dr. Anthony Browder. Let me just see if I can chime him in right here. Is this him? Yep. There he is. Dr. Browder, welcome. I don't know if you're there. Are you there? There you are. Good morning. Uh-oh. Let me see. Let me get you right here. I think I might have muted you here, my brother.
There we go.
Oh, there you are.
Good to go now. All right. It's a pleasure to be on with
you,
Greg.
How are you today?
I'm well. Any day that you're above ground is a day you should be grateful for. So I'm grateful. I'm doing well and happy to have this opportunity to speak with you this afternoon.
Wow, so exciting to have you here with us. Our good friend Carl Nelson plugged us in there. My good friend and mentor there. We chat often about consciousness. I've been on his show many times, even including a few times live from Ghana. You've been on this show a few times, and we were just chatting about you. Came up in conversation. I was like, hey, plug me in. I want to talk to him, and you're here. And thank you so much for joining us. Would it be fair to say that you are a student of Runoko Rashidi and the next generation carrying his legacy? Is that a fair statement?
Well, a more accurate statement would be that Runoko and I are contemporaries. I'm a few years older than Runoko, but we share some of the same Jegna. Here on the East Coast, we use the phrase Jegna as opposed to mentor. We were introduced to that term by Wade Nobles, psychologist Wade Nobles, who shared with us that Jegna is a Amharic word which comes out of Ethiopia, and it references people who are defenders of the culture, people who understand who they are and live their lives in defense of African people, places, and thought. That idea has been advanced by my dear colleague, Haile Gerima, who's from Ethiopia. Haile Gerima, the filmmaker of Sankofa, who has as his logo for his company, Maifadu Films, a drawing of two Jegna, a brother and a sister holding a spear and a shield, fully prepared to defend their culture. So Runoko and I share Jegna, who helped to nurture our growth and development. You mentioned several of them at the top of the program, Dr. John Henri Clarke, Dr. Joseph Ben Yuckanen, John Jackson, Ivan Van Sertima, Francis Cress Welsing, and a whole host of sisters and brothers who were a generation ahead of us, but who were kind enough to allow Runoko and myself to shadow them. So we kind of grew up in their midst. They were kind enough to see something within the both of us that they admired, and they opened up opportunities for us to travel with them, for us to study with them, for us to put them on speed dial so that we could have conversations with them and advance their careers. And as they went on to become ancestors, we found ourselves stepping up to walk in their footsteps, to serve as an example for the generations coming behind us. So we're part of a continuum.
Your voice is very, very important in such a time as this. For those of us who are living in America, I believe that we're in a cultural revolution. We really need now more than ever to pay attention from whence we came. And when that train of thought occurs, I think it's important to note that, our history and our consciousness, as American people who live in America, always picks up where slavery is. We landed here in 1619, but there were massive, civilizations, societies prior to the Europeans' arrival in Africa. How do you all go about this deep study of that when there's so much, misinformation that has been created by the whole anthropologist archaeology community? They've gone over and they've gotten artifacts and whatnot and told us a different story of who we are as African people. How do you correct that in your study? How do you do it?
Well, we do it by engaging in Sankofa, to look back and reclaim the knowledge of the past, to identify the information in the present moment, and to verify that information, concretize that information, preserve that information so that it can be passed along to future generations. What I found, Greg, as a result of doing this work for over 45 years, is that everything goes in cycles. I was fortunate to have grown up in the 1960s. I came of age in the 1960s, which in my mind, I still believe that was the most significant decade within the past 200 years. And that many of the people who helped to shape my consciousness were young brothers and sisters in the 1960s, and they were part of the Black consciousness movement. We referenced John Henri Clarke at the top of this show. Dr. Clarke was one of the principals involved in establishing the African Heritage Studies Association. He was the first president of the African Heritage Studies Association. He also was instrumental through his organization and through his network of other scholars. He was responsible for helping to expand Negro History Week into Black History Month in 1977. Wade Nobles, who I mentioned previously, Wade was part of a group of psychologists, a group of thinkers who helped to establish the Association of Black Psychologists, which was formed in the 1960s. Dr. Francis Cress Welsing and others helped to form the Association of Black Psychologists in the 1960s. I have colleagues who were members of the Association of Black Social Workers. So I've been blessed to have walked in the footsteps of sisters and brothers who were in the forefront of shaping our consciousness in the 1960s and developed institutions which are still serving us today. One of the things that becomes crystal clear as we engaged in the study of the recovery of our historical and cultural memory is to remember what John Henri Clarke taught us, and that is that all history is a current event. There is nothing new in the world except the history you do not know. So it's our job, it's our responsibility to uncover those historical facts which have been banned or outlawed by our former oppressors and our current oppressors. If everything is cyclical, then all we have to do is study the lessons of the past to understand how we got where we are. And then we also will have the knowledge and the expertise in order to undo the efforts that we're witnessing right now to erase our historical and cultural memory. So what's happening in Texas and Florida and Virginia by governors of those backward states is an effort to erase our historical and cultural memory. This is not new. So if we know our past, we'll understand what efforts have been made in the past in order to stop us from moving forward. We'll know what worked and what didn't work. We can develop new tactics to circumvent the efforts of our oppressors, of our enemies. But the important thing that you referenced in that question is the ability to go back before 1619, to go back before our enslavement. Again, quoting John Henri Clarke, he said that if you begin your history with slavery, everything since then looks like progress. So through sitting at the feet of these incredible scholars, what I have come to understand is that our history is as old as time itself. We know that Africans were the first human beings on the planet. We know that, and just to give you a short overview of what is not being taught, is the fact that it's been documented by anthropologists, by geneticists, that Homo sapiens sapiens, human beings, lived in Africa alone over 300,000 years ago. And that these Africans, over a period of time, migrated out of Northeast Africa into Asia, and then eventually, over a period of tens of thousands of years, populated the world. So what that means is that the first people in Asia were Africans. The first people in Europe were Africans. The first people in the Americas were Africans. And throughout a period of adaptation to environment, speciation, these Africans lost their melanin, their skin color. They became lighter, their hair texture changed, their hair became straighter, and they evolved to become the other so-called races that now inhabit the planet. And if we understand one clear thing, it should be that there is no such thing as race. Race was a false construct created by racists in order to divide humanity by color. There's only one race, the human race, which had its origins in Africa. And I'll share this little ditty with you. If Africans had been living on this planet, walking, talking, thinking, and creating for 300,000 years, geneticists have recently found when Africans in Europe mutated, lost their melanin, and became the people now classified as European, i.e. white people. And that mutation occurred somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 years ago. So if we just take that little piece of knowledge, then what it means that people of African ancestry have a 292,000 year head start on white folk. So we have more historical, more genetic memory than anybody else on the planet. Our job is to recover those memories and to use that knowledge in order to determine what our future will look like for the benefit of the generations who will come behind us.
Because if we have that realization, we could do better, I guess, eh? What's the benefit of this knowledge? So somebody out there might be like, okay, that's cool, interesting, but what does that mean to us today?
So that's a question that I'm frequently asked when I'm a guest on Carl Nelson's show. Why is history important? Look, history is everything. History is life. You meet a woman for the first time. First thing you want to know is her name, her telephone number. Where do you live? That's his history. You go to a doctor for the first time. They're going to want to know your medical history. What diseases do you have? What diseases ran in your family? You go for a job interview. Folk want to know your job history. So everything that is a part of our lives revolves around history. So if you steal a people, if you make it illegal for them to document their history, if you erase their cultural memory, then they will be whatever you say they are. And someone without a historical memory, without a historical background, will ask you, why is history important? No one
Mm-hmm.
asks a Christian why the history of Jesus is important. No one asks a Jew why the history of Abraham and Moses is important. No one asks a Muslim why the history of Muhammad is important. So why is it when African people want to talk about our story, people now suddenly question the need to bring up history? History is all that matters, brother. And as my friend James Small says, history will erase the mystery. When you know who you are, when you're clear about the cultural tendencies that you have inherited, when you know what you've done, you know what you can do. And when you do what you've done, you'll find out that you can do it better than anybody else. That is what our history has substantiated time and time again.
Wow, well, quite powerful, quite powerful. I too am a child of the civil rights movement, and I grew up in the '60s. I remember, look, when they killed Dr. King, I'm the neighborhood paper boy. Okay, so it's interesting because a couple of years ago, made my first trip to Ghana after I've been going to South Africa since 2010 every single year. Went to Ghana with Dr. Arikana Chiambori Kwao. And part of that program, we had a candlelight vigil at the Cape Coast Dungeon. Now, for me, the sheer size of that dungeon or castle, we call it dungeon, really hit me in the gut, right, of how massive the transatlantic slave trade was. And then in the words that we heard during the course of the candlelight vigil, really, really, opened my mind a little bit more. I was reminded, because the rabbi that gave the tour, he says,
Rabbi.
Yeah, Rabbi Cohen.
Rabbi
Yeah,
Kohen. Yes, yes,
yes,
indeed.
yes.
Met him many times.
Yes, he says, they would have us think that we were naked savages, but understand we were architects, we were artisans, we were kings, we were queens. And I remember back in the '60s, we had Ebony magazine, and my mom she always used to get books out of, for us out of Ebony, and so the one book that opened my mind was Before the Mayflower. And I think I still might have that around here somewhere. And then you were speaking about psychology. My dad got me Black Rage, Price and Cobb, two
I
psychologists
remember that book.
there. And, but just having that exposure to the information that there were great empires, great civilizations, and it does make you stand stronger, make you think a little bit more straighter, I guess is the word I'd like to use at this time. And then as a grown man, having gone out through the Cape Coast dungeon, when I finished the candlelight vigil, the first thing that I said was, what is the big deal about critical race theory? It happened. It's like you have this ginormous edifice right here, and there's like 60 or 70 of them that dot the western coast of Africa. It happened. Why are we not allowed to tell our story? Why are states and governments so intent on silencing that piece of history? Is it fear?
Well, brother, look, it's as Asa Hilliard, another dear friend, colleague, and Jegna and ancestor said, mental slavery is worse than physical slavery because a mental slave believes that he or she are free, never realizing that the shackles are on their mind. And as Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who we're honoring this month, said that if you control a person's thinking, you don't have to worry about their actions. You don't have to order them to go to the back door because they will go without being told. And if there is no back door, they will create one. So miseducation, mental manipulation has always been the rule of the day for evil people who seek to make their fortunes enslaving, conquering, and taking advantage of others. This is as old as time itself. But what we have to realize is that the situation of African people living in the diaspora, the story of the enslavement of African people is probably one of the most distorted stories of any people on the planet. There are 138 slave dungeons built along the coast of West Africa between Senegal and Cameroon, 138 slave dungeons. And during the course of the European enslavement of African people, which lasted from 1444 until 1888, we're talking about the loss of life, which is the equivalent of over 100 million people. Now, Dr. Clarke often talked about this number, but even if we give a conservative number, even if we gave a conservative number of 50 million people, men, women, and children, and you saw Cape Coast Dungeon and Elmina Dungeon in Ghana. So you saw that there were slave pens for the men, there were slave pens for the women, there were slave pens for the children. Nobody was spared. Entire villages were decimated between 1444 and 1888. So countless lives were destroyed. And these Europeans, every European nation with the exception of Russia, participated in the wholesale theft, sale, and enslavement of African people. So the presence of Africans in the Americas, for example, is the primary result of Europeans stealing, raping, selling, and abusing over 13 generations of African people here in the United States alone. So these are historical facts. And one of the issues that we're dealing with has been mirrored in South Africa, where you said you spend a lot of time traveling. When Europeans in South Africa established apartheid, its purpose was to erase the historical and cultural memory of continental Africans. And that when apartheid came to an end, the creators of that vicious, inhumane system were afraid that if Africans came into power, Africans would do to the Europeans what the Europeans had done to us. If you look at history, you will find that nowhere in the history of African people have there been instances where Africans have sought to discover Europeans, conquer them, and enslave them. That is not our way. That is not our nature. But if we're clear about the study of history, we'll find that not only did every European nation, with the exception of Russia, participated in the wholesale theft, sale, and enslavement of African people, which was sanctioned by the Pope, sanctioned by the Vatican. Pope Eugenius IV wrote the papal bull stating that Africans had no soul, so that it was perfectly all right for Christians to steal Africans, sell them, rape them, because Africans had no soul. So these are issues that we have to look at. We need to understand why English is the language of commerce. English is the language of science. English is the language of history and culture and civility. Why is that? Why is it that this tiny little island off the coast of Europe controlled at one point 85% of the planet and the planet's resources? When we begin to ask these questions and begin to understand who people of European ancestry are, we will have a better idea of the death and destruction they have spared around the world, and how to defend ourselves against these acts, which are still happening right now. And to your point, one of the reasons why people in the United States are so intent on suppressing critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the teaching of enslavement in America, the teaching of African history, is because they are fearful that if we discover who we really are, if they discover what our ancestors have done, then we will realize that we carry our ancestors' memories in us. We carry our ancestors' capacity for power and greatness within us. And that once we start turning to ourselves, as opposed to being dependent on our former oppressors to hire us, to educate us, to do for us, once we become self-sufficient, then the game is over. So when you understand these dynamics, then it makes perfectly good sense why Donald Trump behaves the way he does, why the Republican Party has lost their mind, why politicians are doing everything within their power to suppress talk of reparations, to suppress the teaching of this historical information, because they're fearful that if we get into power, we would do to them what they've done to us, which is not our way. They're also fearful that once we have removed the yoke of the blinders of ignorance and insufficiency and begin to embrace our glory and our grandeur, that we will eclipse them. They are fighting for their lives. White folk in America are fighting for their lives. Just watch them on January the 6th. You saw them fighting for their lives. Things are going to be much worse during this upcoming presidential year. And we're going to see the hoods come off of the robed Klansmen and Klanswomen who've been our neighbors and our friends and the owners of the businesses that we patronize for generations. They're going to expose their hand because they know the jig is just about up. They are desperate, and desperate people act in ways that not only jeopardize their well-being, but the well-being of the planet and humanity itself. So now is not the time to sit on the fence. Now is not the time to ask questions about why is this important? Why should we be talking about race and history? If you don't get it, you should just move out the way and let others who do get it do their thing, and maybe your children's children might benefit from the work that we're doing right now.
Mhm. Wow, and let me ask you this again. We're speaking about the current election season. A seasoned intellectual academic consciousness professor. You hear Nikki Haley say America has never been a racist country. You said,
Well, Nikki Haley should go back to where her last name encourages her to go. Anyone who says that is either a lie or a fool. Anyone who says that. But she's speaking to her base. Let's be clear. Nikki Haley is out of her mind. Nikki Haley is part of a group of people who embody the essence of evil. They are liars. They are strangers to the truth. So I don't spend my time responding to what she says because I know she's a liar. I recognize a liar when I see them, when I hear them, based on my awareness of their history, their past. So folk like that, they can't be summarily dismissed because they are dangerous, but we should not devote a lot of time and energy, precious time and energy, talking about them or thinking about them. We have to be concerned about ourselves, our families, and our communities, because either way this election goes, Black folk in America, Black folk in the United States are still going to catch hell, regardless as to whether or not there's a Democrat or a Republican in office. So our primary focus should be, how do we educate ourselves? Because, on one very basic level, Greg, I'll share this with you. I'm kind of glad that there's this pushback against African history and culture, because there have been too many of our people who've been sitting on the fence, who haven't thought that the work that Dr. Rashidi has done, or Dr. Welsing has done, or Van Sertima, or any of these other scholars, they haven't thought that that work is important. But because now white folk want to ban it, they're buying our books. They're watching our YouTube videos. So more people now are becoming interested in the information that we've dedicated our lives to. I mentioned at the top of the show that history is cyclical. So we're about to move into a cycle that is similar to that of the 1960s, the Black consciousness movement, not necessarily the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement spanned 13 years, from the death of Emmett Till to the death of Martin Luther King Jr. The Black consciousness movement, the Black power movement, really took hold between 65, 66 through, I'd say maybe 75. And the gains that were made during that period of time impacted people of color all around the world. And so that's the reason why the people in power had to do whatever they could in order to suppress that movement. As long as we were singing We Shall Overcome, as long as we were talking about being nonviolent, asking our enemy to love us, they were fine with that. But once brothers and sisters started picking up guns, started speaking back and talking back to those who were killing us, who were oppressing us, then they became afraid. And so they had to devise means to minimize those voices in our community who were leading us in the right direction. So what they wound up doing, and you and I are probably contemporaries, and I'm sure you remember when the movie Superfly came out.
Yeah, yeah.
Superfly glorified cocaine. Superfly made a hero out of drug users and drug dealers. And with the advent of that film, we had, now I'm from Chicago, so I can speak from personal experiences on this subject matter from now until the rest of my life. And it was Curtis Mayfield, my homeboy Curtis Mayfield, who did the soundtrack to Superfly. And if you remember that song, I'm your pusher man, I'm your mama, I'm your daddy, I'm the nigga in the alley. It was the first song played on the airwaves that used the N-word. Right. And so not only did that music shift our consciousness, because 7 years before that, it was Curtis Mayfield who introduced a stream of consciousness in the music when he did Amen, when he did Keep On Pushing, when he did We're a Winner in the 1960s. He used music as a vehicle to help transform the consciousness of African people. So when Superfly came out and he did the score for that film, and he then talked about being a pusher man, then the script was flipped. And we started moonwalking backwards, all right? And what you saw shortly after that, crack and heroin flooded our communities. And we all should be familiar with what was happening in Vietnam when the United States government was shipping heroin from Vietnam back in the body bags of soldiers. And those soldiers landed at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. And those drugs were then distributed all throughout the East Coast and around the country. So our communities were intentionally flooded with drugs in order to neutralize what was happening with the Black consciousness movement. And then in California, you all are well aware of the role that the CIA has played with the introduction of crack cocaine. So history helps us understand how we got into the fix that we're in. And it also tells us what we can do to change the dynamic of our circumstances. Those sisters and brothers who put their lives on the line, who do the research, who share this information, are folk who are fighting a physical war, a mental war, an emotional war, and a spiritual war. And the only reason why we're still alive to this very day, my brother, is because of the sacrifices of untold Jegna, who have dedicated themselves to balancing the scales of truth and justice to make sure that there were voices out here who will ensure that certain information will be preserved for future generations. And that's the war we're still fighting to this very day.
You know, I want to ask you, our mantra here is to build bridges of music, arts, and culture with Africa and African Americans. Excuse me. And to that end, you know, we've been taking groups over to South Africa, like you mentioned. Now we're starting in Ghana and everything. And as part of our orientation, when we assemble these groups, because most of the time the travelers have never been to Africa, it's just a dream, exactly. You know. And we sit down and we study, you know, history so that they understand what they're about to see when they arrive in Africa. You go to South Africa, they're only, you know, at 30 years removed from apartheid, right? So you still see the vestiges, they're still fresh, you know, still townships and all that kind of stuff that's going on. But, you know, I'm not Dr. Browder. I'm Greg J., just a guy who is steeped in culture and steeped, you know, working at a place like Stevie Wonder's KJLH for 25 years. You know, I was talking to another brother that we worked together for a long time there. Both of us, you know, I call myself semi-retired, but both of us retired from that. But you work at a Black media that's the epicenter of Blackness in Los Angeles. You're sitting at the feet of, the Dr. Browders are coming through there, Francis Cress Welsing, Dick Gregory. It's like you're not hearing it over the air. You're like there when you know what I mean when people are coming through. So I'm saying when we're going to Africa, what is it like to travel with the Runoko Rashidi, with the Dr. Anthony Browder? What is that like?
Well, let me just paint a picture for you. It was 47 years ago on February the 21st, 1977, that I met Dr. Ivan Van Sertima for the first time. He had just published his book that came before Columbus, The African Presence in America. He was speaking at Georgetown Law School here in Washington, D.C., and he gave this incredible presentation about the pre-Columbian African presence in the Americas. He showed images of the heads of the people referred to as the Olmecs, who built ships, navigated the Nile River, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Atlantic Ocean, and made numerous voyages here 2,500 years before Christopher Columbus was born. And he blew my mind when he said that these Africans were from Egypt and the Egyptians were Black. This was the first time in my life, Greg, that I heard anyone say that the ancient Egyptians were Black. Now, I had graduated from Howard in 1974. I thought I was smart. I thought I knew a lot. But hearing Van Sertima share those words with me literally blew my mind. And I went back to study the things that I thought I knew. And I discovered what I now refer to as forbidden knowledge. I discovered Dr. Ben. I discovered Dr. Clarke. I discovered John G. Jackson. I discovered all of these scholars who had done this research decades earlier. And so I made my very first trip to Egypt with Dr. Ben in 1980, December of 1980. And the 13 days that I spent on the Nile changed my life forever. I saw the physical evidence that had been denied me throughout my life. And upon returning to Washington, I created my second business. Let me give you a confession right now, you and your audience. People call me Dr. Browder, but I have a PhD in nothing. My degree is in graphic design and advertising. Right? A bachelor's of fine arts from Howard University. I'm an artist by training. And so what I wound up doing after I returned from Egypt, I established my second business in 1981. And I used that business to now share information that I was learning about Kemet, about Egypt, about African history and culture. And I presented that information in such a manner using my design, my graphic skills, and my marketing skills to make this knowledge palatable to people who've been socialized to think that history wasn't important. So since the creation of IKG, my company, I have been taking groups to Egypt since 1987. We've done trips to South Africa. We've done trips to Ghana, and we do study tours. And the purpose behind the study tours, and all of us who do these trips, from Runoko to Dr. Ben, Dr. Clarke, AC Hilliard, all of us who do those study tours, we organize these tours so that we go to these African countries not as tourists. We go as people who are coming to relearn what we have forgotten and what was illegal. The structure of our study tours is such that we do an orientation before we go. We go out into the field, we visit sites, we have lectures in the evening. So that specifically with the tours that we do in Egypt, the idea is to create an experience such that those who travel to the Nile with us, those who travel to Kemet with us, will experience what we refer to as a kemetamorphosis. Traveling down the Nile to ancient Kemet and being infused with the right historical information unlocks memories buried within your psyche such that your consciousness is transformed. When you transform consciousness, you transform thinking. When you transform thinking, you transform speech. When you transform speech, you transform action. When you transform action, you transform the world. So these processes are designed to um, teach us what we would never learn in school. So the people such as Runoko, Runoko traveled to over 130 countries, right? He took people on many of these tours. He visited museums around the world documenting the African presence before enslavement, right? And so these are experiences that those who have the funds to travel will come back with their consciousness transformed. But the important thing is, Greg, the work that you're doing with the media. A majority of our people, I dare say 95% of our people would never leave the country. I've heard a report that less than 50, that about 52% of the population doesn't even in the United States doesn't even have a passport. So there are more people who will not travel out of the United States than those who will travel. So the purposes of your show, to bring guests like myself on, who have written books, who lecture, provides us with an opportunity to help transform the consciousness of people right in their very homes. So we have to use whatever means we have at our disposal in order to liberate the minds that unfortunately don't even realize that they're mentally enslaved. But once the light bulb goes off, once people hear something that resonates within their soul, it changes everything. So it's about initiating more and more of these changes.
Yeah, it's interesting because can you hear me there? Okay, good.
Yes, again.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we take the groups, I try to have a mix, right? We definitely want to get deep, dig deep in the history, and I do the best that I can. Again, I'm not, I'm not the academic of it, but I just try to point people to the information before we hit the road and travel. And then we also try to have, a little fun over there because that's what people also want to do. And at the end of my tours, we always give like an ascertainment form so we can, improve our service if there's anything that we can improve. And one of the number one comments is that, man, Brother Greg, they don't show us this Africa because we're so ingrained that Africans are so backwards and
Yeah.
grass skirts and huts. And okay, there might be that way out in the rural areas, but when they see these cities, when they see the clubs and restaurants and hotels, and you're in downtown Accra, and everybody looks like you. It's really, really something. And it does open that a really deep psyche, a consciousness in the souls of those people. One thing that I get a joy out of, this is funny, when you say opening the psyche, I always love when the sisters come on the trip, whether it's South Africa, Ghana, whatever. What I notice is some of them will have their weaves or their hair pieces and stuff like that. But about 2 days in, after they've, peeped all the other sisters, walking around, I gotta go get my hair done. And
Mhm.
it is so funny, when they come back and they have their natural hairstyles and everything like that, And I think that's an example of the deep, deep change to the psyche. Now they're proud of their God-given, their divinely given gift of their hair. And you know how sisters are about their hair. They are just all about it. And to make that change and adjustment is just one, might be simple, but it still is an indication of a change in consciousness.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, brother, my first book, From the Browder File, which was published in 1989, one of the essays in that book is called The Politics of Hair. And what I do is I equate, historically, I look at the variation of hairstyles and associate Black hairstyles with either the gaining or the loss of political, social, and economic power. As long as we're comfortable mirroring our oppressor and dying our hair, straightening our hair, doing these things to model the European standard of beauty, they are secure. But in the 60s now, when we grew our afros, when we began to take on African names and wear African clothes, our consciousness shifts. So hair is a barometer of consciousness. I mentioned earlier Superfly. So what was the hairstyle you saw proliferated in that film Superfly? Ron
Had the
O'Neill's
perm.
character had straight hair. So
Sure did.
brothers started wearing perms. So listen, man, I'm from Chicago, west side of Chicago. I live less than a mile from where Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were murdered. I remember the Black Panther Party in 1960, 68, and 69, right? I remember that. I remember brothers and sisters wearing a big afro, talking about power to the people.
Power to the people.
After Superfly came out, I saw brothers that had the biggest afro now wearing perms, right?
Yeah.
And here's an image for you. If you can imagine a 6'6" brother used to have an afro, Saturday afternoon going shopping for the party that evening, walking around town on the west side of Chicago with pink rollers in his hair,
It is
in
here.
his head did for the party tonight, and platform shoes, high heels. So you're
Yes.
talking about the emasculation of African people, African men specifically, and our consciousness. So after the Superfly, you then had the Jerry curl, right? And then you have, and you know, then cornrows came in. They were big for a while. And then locks were big. They were big for a while. And then weaves come in. So all you have to do to really understand where we are as a people, politically, socially, economically, look at the hairstyles that are dominating, right? So now weaves are big, and people with different colors in their hair, purple and green and red and orange. So for someone who has no hair, I can tell you that hair is a distraction, right? Hair is a distraction. And when you look at how much money people spend on their hair, you look at how much time they invest in their hair, you look at money and time that could be better spent educating your children, putting them in a private African center school as opposed to that public school or that charter school that is going to continue the miseducation of your child, saving your money and going on a study tour to Africa with you, myself, or anybody else, right? Traveling to conferences, going to museums. So hair is an indicator of consciousness. You know, you see that clearly. It's an indication of consciousness. So the mere fact that you said that these sisters who are on your trip, after 2 or 3 days on the continent, their consciousness shifts and they want to change their hair so that they can be a reflection of the sisters that they see who are proud of who they are and what their ancestry represents. So, you know, this thing is deep.
It's deep,
This
man.
thing is complex. And we have to be patient with our people. We have to be loving with our people. And we have to meet them where they are and work with them to help them transform their consciousness so that we'll have enough people in this fight to be able to advance the causes of those scholars who are here to help us win this victory for our minds and our souls.
So now you're coming out to the West Coast, and you got a documentary on Brother Runoko Rashidi. What's the documentary about? What shall we learn?
Well, I'm pleased to serve as the executive producer of a documentary entitled Global Assignment, The Life and Times of Dr. Runoko Rashidi. We were able to, this is my vision, all right? This is my vision. I was close with Dr. Clarke, who is one of my heroes. And the year before he died, Wesley Snipes produced a documentary called John Henri Clarke, A Great and Mighty Walk. It was a phenomenal interview with a man who everybody in the world should know. So my goal, after learning that our brother Runoko had passed, my goal was to produce a film, a documentary that would have the impact that Dr. Clarke's documentary did. And so we wound up, I had a colleague, Bob Lott, who's the director of the film, who had traveled with Runoko to Egypt, to Ghana, to Morocco, to Paris, and has had all of this footage. So we had his footage, and then we also did interviews with people who knew Runoko, worked with him, traveled with him, and we meshed all of this together. In addition to interviews with Runoko, talking about his journeys, talking about his life, we interviewed Runoko's family, and put together a 72-minute documentary, which covers the life story of this incredible man, and will inspire youth and elders to know who walked among us. It will hopefully extend his legacy, prompt people to buy his books, to study his material, to study the scholars who impressed him. So I'll be coming to California I'll be in California from the 15th of February through the 24th of February. I've got engagements in San Diego, and then we'll be coming to LA, 2 engagements in LA, and then going up to San Francisco. So during these engagements, we'll be screening Runoko's film. I'll be talking about his life work and helping to raise interest. This film is also available on Vimeo for download, for streaming, or for purchase. And one of the highlights of this upcoming trip will be on February the 21st, when we'll have a special screening at University of California at LA, where the film will be screened, and they will make a formal announcement of them archiving Runoko Rashidi's library. So that information will be many of his books will be digitized and will be available to students on campus, will be available to scholars around the world to study his work. So we're going to honor our brother Runoko on the 21st of this month. And we're going to do what we know to do in order to ensure that the name of this honorable ancestor lives forever. So, I'm grateful for this opportunity to share this information with those listening to your podcast, and hopefully they can come out and see us. You've got the flyer, so hopefully you can make that information available to those who are watching this podcast. We'll be at World Beat Cultural Center in San Diego on the 16th. And then we've got a venue in LA on the 19th. And then we'll be at the university on the 21st. And I'll be in San Francisco on the 24th. So that's this California trip. And it always gives me joy to come out to the West Coast, to hang out with friends and family, and help to spread the word. Really looking forward to it. Hey, Greg, you're muted.
Yes, let's see. We got the trailer here. Let's see if we get this to work here. Let's go.
Okay.
Yeah. Hold on one sec.
Okay. And that's the information on the Vimeo download.
Oh, okay. That's not the trailer?
No, that's not the trailer. It's a separate file.
Okay.
It's about a 3-minute piece.
Okay. I tell you what we'll do on that one then. We'll put that one in the chat and on our platforms, because I thought this was the trailer here. Oh, no. Here we go. Wait. Watch trailer. There we go.
Africans came to America before, during, and after enslavement. Don't start our history at the end. Start it at the beginning. Runoko Rashidi.
There was a time if you called me an African, you better be ready to fight, because that was the most low-down, dirty, insulting insult you could give me. But if you call me an African now, I'll never leave your side. we're friends forever, because that is a tremendous compliment. But I had to find out who I was.
Many of the ills facing Black America stem from the lack of knowledge about the true history concerning Americans of African descent. A history that began way before the Mayflower and is inclusive of the great civilizations and cultures which populated the African continent. As a result, Africa and all things African have been and continue to be devalued at best, and at worst, excluded from the conversation altogether. Attacking this value deficit was the mission of the late Dr. Runoko Rashidi.
And I can honestly say that I haven't unpacked a suitcase completely since about 1997, 98. In the last few years, I remember a few years ago, I actually visited 27 countries in one calendar year. And since 1998, I've been blessed to visit 103 countries. And it's just changed my life dramatically. I've learned a lot, and mostly what I've learned about is myself.
Dr. Runoko Rashidi was a world traveler who spent 3 decades traveling to over 125 countries.
Because that was such a rare thing for a Black scholar to travel extensively like he did.
Studying, chronicling, and lecturing on the migration and presence of African people throughout the world.
He was obsessed with documenting what I refer to as the positive portrayal of the worldwide African experience.
In awe with his brilliance and his unwavering commitment to African people.
There's a consistent thread that goes through Runoko Rashidi, and that being his commitment to African people, his love of African people, his desire to see African people be better.
On August 2nd, 2021, Dr. Runoko Rashidi transitioned in Egypt to walk no more in the earthly realm, but to walk among the ancestors, knowing that when it came to his people, he fulfilled his purpose, and his job was well done. He now walks among the ancestors.
Wow, incredible. I'm excited. Man, I can't wait.
So Greg, let me just let your listeners know that there was some lag in the trailer because of the internet speed. So you won't have any issues at the streaming, or if you purchase the actual documentary itself, you'll see it crystal clear. But you know, let me speak for a second about the title, Global Assignment. That's a paraphrase statement from something that Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, who lived here in the DC area, talked about. Dr. Welsing, who's the author of the ISIS papers, which I assume your listeners are familiar with. Dr. Welsing often said that every person was born with a cosmic assignment. That is, we came to this earth to do something which was better than anybody else could ever do. That was our cosmic assignment. And so if we understand that reality, that our souls come into a physical body carrying memories of prior life, and those who understand that and are able to access these memories are able to live phenomenal lives. So this documentary documents the phenomenal life of Dr. Runoko Rashidi, whose cosmic assignment was to travel the globe and to resurrect for some, to document for others the global African presence. He traveled to more countries than any person I know. He visited museums in the far corners of the earth, photographing images of African people in those countries before enslavement, showing us Africans as the originators of many of these nations, as leaders in many of these nations, and giving us a historical perspective which many of us will never get from school or the media. So this documentary allows us to honor a man who devoted his life to African people, and it helps to ensure that his name will live forever. And that is the goal of any ancestor, to make sure that their names are spoken, because in speaking their names, they continue to live in our minds and our hearts.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Say their name. That's what we say. Say their name for sure. Wow. I'm so inspired right now. I'm all about to cry.
Well, that's so, I mean, tears are good, man. Facial libations work.
Yes. Good. Now talk about the Henry Clarke project.
The John Henri Clarke.
Listen, you have so many things going on. You got a new homeboy right now. Your friend Greg J. So I'm rolling with you.
Well, good, because it's important that we use the media as a tool to help transform consciousness. We don't have the money, we don't have the power, we don't have the institutions that many of those who have dedicated themselves to our undoing. So we have to develop allegiances, and I'm always pleased to work with someone. Greg, I haven't even known you for a week, right? Carl just connected us over the weekend, and we're doing this thing, and I have a feeling that we're going to be doing some more things together. So my thing is sharing information, creating content, and making it accessible to those with the greatest need to know. So I was inspired to do something to honor my dear friend and colleague, John Henri Clarke. Let me back up for a second. And tell you about another project I started 15 years ago, and that was the Asa Restoration Project. Asa Hilliard, beautiful brother historian, psychologist, just a wonderful human being, wrote the introduction to my first book, From the Browder File, published in 1989. And that book came out, nobody knew Tony Browder, but everyone of consciousness knew Asa Hilliard. And just having his name on that book has made that book a perennial bestseller. That book is over 33 years old, and it's still selling like hotcakes. We have sold almost 1 million copies of that book.
Wow.
And so Asa died suddenly on a trip to Egypt. Died on August the 7th, 2007. And so his death came as a shock to me. And as I was mourning his loss, I was looking and thinking about a way that I can honor him, and I can honor everything that he's meant to me. And that opportunity presented itself a year later as I was traveling to Egypt with a colleague of mine. And I came upon an opportunity to become involved in the excavation of 3 25th Dynasty tombs. So we established the Asa Restoration Project on September the 21st, 2008. And for the past 14 years, we have raised over $2 million to fund the excavation, conservation, and restoration of what began in 2008 as 3 Kushite tombs, but has now expanded itself to over 44 tombs. We have been documenting the Kushite presence in Kemet during what is known as the 25th Dynasty. We've got tons and tons of information. So the Asa Restoration Project has allowed me to do this work. We are the first people of African ancestry in the history of the world to fund and participate in an archaeological excavation. So when the National Museum of African American History and Culture opened in Washington, D.C. in 2016, and I visited that museum, which is an incredible artifice with incredible displays, wonderful history. I, like many of my colleagues, were disturbed, that's the best way I can describe it, to find out that this museum begins our story with slavery. And that
Wow.
there is no mention about who we were before our world was turned upside down. So I was able to get some funds, raise some funds to create a new exhibition, which will be opening at our facility here in Washington, D.C., the John Henri Clarke Enhanced History Project. And the purpose of that project is to tell the story of who African people were at least 6,000 years before our world was turned upside down via the Ma'afa in the process of enslavement. So that exhibit will be a permanent exhibit in the Thurgood Marshall Center in Washington, D.C., where we've had our offices for the past 17 years. And we'll have numerous displays that will highlight the successes, the culture of African people beginning in the Nile Valley, migrating from the Nile to the Niger, to the Potomac, to the Hudson and the Mississippi, showing a continuous thread of African excellence and success. So that exhibition will be opening in the spring of this year. And it's our desire that people will see this exhibition before they go to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, so they'll have context. So they'll know the prequel, and they can step into this incredible museum knowing that we were on top of the world before we were buried by evil people in this world. And they'll have a greater opportunity of what they have the capacity to do. So that's a project that I'm, very excited to have curated. And there will be some other projects that we'll be developing over the course of the next 5 years or so.
Will that be a traveling exhibit?
It has the potential to be a traveling exhibit. We are using the wall space, approximately 400 square feet of wall space on the second floor of the Thurgood Marshall Center to put up wall displays. And all of those items can be digitized. They can be replicated and circulated anywhere on the planet. So it's our goal to be able to make information accessible to as many people as possible in as many formats as possible so that we leave no Black mind behind.
All right, when you're ready, come on now. I'm Mr. Arts and Culture, and a foundation of that is creating exhibits that speak directly to our consciousness, telling our story, whether it's, art gallery exhibits. Some of y'all that are watching this and listening to this know you've been to some of our exhibits here, down to performing arts, through dance, through theater, through music. I mean, this is what we do here at the Hannibal Media Group, that's for sure. And would love to talk to you about the possibility of creating a presence out here on the West Coast. How do we do that? How do we, do the business of it? All of that whole stuff. Let's get it.
Well, Greg, look, let me share this with you. You and I are going to be good friends. I can tell already.
Yes,
I am a businessman. I've been self-employed for 44 years. So I've been in the business of promoting and teaching our history and our culture. And I'm pretty damn good at doing that.
That's right.
A lot of people don't know that for 8 years, I would come out to California, Northern California, in San Jose once a month, where I had programs in 3 high schools. I would take African-American students out and have special classes with them, teaching them their history and culture. We did that for 8 years. And working with my daughter now, who's a retired educator, retired as in I got her out of the classroom, so she's not working with me full-time. We developed a curriculum and we took this program national. It's called the Cultural Imperative Initiative. And so we have a curriculum, we have content that we have perfected over time to document that when our young folk are immersed in their history and culture, it transforms their consciousness. I have a colleague, Dr. Kweli Zakuri, who is a graduate student from Howard University. We hired him to come out to do a longitudinal study on the efficacy of our work. So he got his PhD studying our work, in which he's able to show that by immersing our children in a positive portrayal of the worldwide African experience, that equates to improvement in personal behavior at home, school, the community, and increases their test scores. So we know the value of this work, which is why we also understand why others are trying to minimize the teaching of this history and culture, because they want us thinking and acting like the N-word, not being the Africans that we truly are. So this is the battle that we're up against. And I, have dedicated my life to doing this work. I would die doing this work and model for others how it can be done successfully. So I'm always interested in partnering with anyone who is serious, who has resources, in order to expand this work for the benefit of the generations who will come behind us.
All right, let's check out this trailer.
One of the most important takeaways from viewing the John Henri Clarke Enhanced History Project and taking the Egypt on the Potomac field trip and visiting the National Museum of African American History and Culture is the importance of remembering and honoring our ancestors. Our ancestors are the bridges which link the past, present, and future. The ancestors are not dead. They live with us every day. The streets we walk on, the buildings we walk through were built by ancestors. The songs we sing, the books we read, the traditions that have been passed down from generation to generation were written by ancestors long gone. The dead are not dead. They live in us. We carry them in our DNA. And all that is required for us to do is acknowledge them, call their names, and allow them to inspire us to do our best work. In the beginning, our ancestors knew not. They studied. For 4,000 years, they learned all there was to know, and they taught others. For 1,000 years, they spread their wisdom from the Nile to the Niger. Then came the Ma'afa, the great disaster. Enslavers made it illegal for Africans to read and write. They were forced to forget all they had learned and taught. They built America from the Hudson to the Potomac to the Mississippi and beyond. After 400 years of forgetting, they forgot that they had forgotten. That changes today. I will remember for them. I will read for them. I will write for them. I will speak for them and teach for them. I will make certain that they are never forgotten again. For I am the vessel through which my ancestors live, breathe, and do their best work.
Nice. I am excited. Let's go. There's so much. There's so much.
All right. Absolutely.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. How can we get a hold of you there, Tony Browder? How can the people reach out to you?
The best way to reach me is through our website, which is www.ikg-info.com, ikg-info.com. You'll find information about our study tours to Egypt. We're doing an annual study tour to Egypt. We're doing a trip to Ghana in August. We have our Egypt on the Potomac field trips. That season runs from April through November. We have a host of other activities that we've been engaging in for, since 1987, brother. It's been, been at this for a minute. And we also have, our books, DVDs, digital downloads of lectures and seminars. So, and we have a free monthly lecture series that we've been doing since 1987. Dr. Hilliard was our very first lecturer, Memorial Day weekend in 1987. We've got archives of those programs on the IKG YouTube channel. So we see ourselves as a repository of information about the African and African American experience. And we invite people to discover us to listen to us, to read our materials, and become an active participant in emancipating ourselves from mental slavery and modeling for our children how free men and women think, speak, and act. That's something that we've always had the capacity to do. And when we do it better than anybody on this planet. So it's time for us to live up to our potential and then show the world what it means to be human.
All right. Give me that website one more time. I want to make sure I have it correct in the chat there.
Sure. It's ikg-info.com. ikg-info.com.
All right, y'all. You got it. We're going to see Tony Browder, our new friend, enhancing our consciousness. Come on, y'all. This is what we have to do. We have to keep on going about it. Thank you so much, Tony Browder, for joining us. Coffee Conversations with Greg J. We look forward to seeing you when you come out here to the Southern California area. And we certainly want to keep shoulder to shoulder with you as we spread consciousness. I want you to come back and share, and let's do some stuff together for sure, and help open the minds of the people.
All right, we will open minds and free minds. We will leave no mind behind, but you have to be a willing recipient. I'm not here to proselytize, convince anybody of anything. Everyone has the right to believe what they want to believe. We provide information with documentation, and we leave it up to people to decide what they want to do and how they want to do it. And we're open to anyone who's willing to be a part of this conscious transforming movement. So, Brother Greg, I'll see you shortly, and I look forward to us chopping it up and building something that will outlive the both of us. Thank you so much, my brother.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Thank you so much, y'all. Now, look at here. This is Coffee Conversations with Greg J. You can get us on our Facebook page, Coffee Conversations with Greg J. You can get it on YouTube, Coffee Conversations with Greg J. We're going to repurpose the audio wherever you get your favorite podcast, iHeart, Spreaker, Spotify. Just type in there, Coffee Conversations with Greg J. Man, I'm so inspired by today. Really, really important information. Look across our platforms. We'll be publicizing this for the next few days. The appearance by Anthony Browder coming to the California area. And those of you who aren't in California and across the world, we're going to just let you know how you can get a hold of his materials. And we're just going to keep it going, okay? All right, my friend. Thank you so much. And remember, love one another. Love one another. Love one another. Peace and blessings.